He renamed Jerusalem Antiochia. A Greek gymnasium was built at the base of the Temple Mount, where uncircumcised naked men performed exercises in public. This event alone shocked and deeply offended the conservative Jewish community. Antiochus ordered the rebuilt Second Temple to be converted into a shrine to Zeus, the ultimate Greek god. Antiochus humiliated all of Israel when he sacrificed a pig on the altar of the temple. He boiled its remains and poured the broth over the sacred vessels, defiling and desecrating everything in the temple. The Jewish community of Jerusalem was now faced with three options. Some converted to worshiping the Greek gods. Others continued to practice circumcision and observance of the Sabbath away from the eyes of the authorities. A third group faced honorable death by openly defying Hellenism. Sensing that the Jewish community was stubbornly and openly flaunting him, Antiochus stormed through the gates of Jerusalem like a wild beast and massacred young and old. He killed an estimated 40,000 people and sacked the temple, carrying off gold worth millions. In response to Greek repression, a revolt was launched in 167 BC. The Jews began a national war of resistance against the Syrians. It was led by Matthias and his 5 sons from the house of Hasmon, also known as the Maccabees, which means hammerer. They led a guerrilla war attacking from the hills surrounding Jerusalem, hammering their Syrian oppressors. 3 years later, the desecrated temple was captured and reconsecrated by the Maccabees. They destroyed the image of Zeus and cleansed the temple, restoring and sanctifying it for worship. After taking the temple, the Maccabees discovered that the temple's light had only 1 day's supply of oil. It would take 8 days to prepare more oil. The temple menorah had to be lit, always. Miraculously, as legend tells us, the fire and the oil lasted for 8 days, until a new supply of oil could be ready. This event is commemorated in the story of Hanukkah, which means dedication, or also the Festival of Lights. On this day, Jewish people all around the world light candles on a special menorah designed for this purpose. The menorah is the symbol of the nation of Israel. Some of the bloodiest and most constant fighting swept down on the area when the Crusades began, late in the 11th century. Ruling Turks restricted travel to Jerusalem and to the holy sites. A trip to the Holy Land was often imposed as a penance on Roman Catholic worshippers of the day. Christians, who believed a pilgrimage to the Holy Land was a religious duty, grew more and more angry with the Turks. Jerusalem had been under Muslim control since the 7th century, when, not long after the death of Muhammad, the Arab caliphs moved into Jerusalem and conquered the old city. Initially, the Arab invaders were tolerant of other faiths. For a period, Jews and Christians had relatively free access to the holy sites. But in 1071 AD, control of Jerusalem passed from the Egyptians to the Turks. They were less tolerant and restricted access to many of Jerusalem's holy places. They were even believed to have desecrated many of the sacred sites. Pope Urban II gave a speech at the Council of Clermont in France in 1095, calling on the Christians to do their moral duty to save the holy places. He called for volunteers to retake Jerusalem. Shouting their battle cry, "God wills it," thousands took up the Crusader cross and set out for Jerusalem. The first Crusaders were ill-trained and poorly armed, and the expeditions were under-financed. But a short time later, a better-equipped army of French and Norman knights joined forces in Constantinople. Launching savage battles, Crusaders captured Antioch in 1098 AD, and finally overwhelmed Jerusalem in 1099 AD. The Crusaders' siege of the city lasted nearly 40 days, and thousands were slaughtered. When the Crusaders finally breached the north wall and stormed the city, they butchered most of the Muslim and Jewish inhabitants. Even those who had fled to their mosques or synagogues for protection were not spared. Rulers of the new Kingdom of Jerusalem began taking steps to protect the holy sites and visiting pilgrims. The well-known Order of the Knights Templar was founded in about 1119 AD. These soldiers, in their white cloaks decorated with a red Maltese cross, traveled the land protecting the faithful. Today, the sacred Al-Aqsa Mosque of the Muslims is believed to rest on an area once important to the Knights Templar. The Knights got their name from the former courtyard of Solomon's Temple, which they converted to their headquarters. Legend has it that an underground building beneath the courtyard once stabled Solomon's horses. Later, the Knights also used it to protect their horses. The Crusaders converted the beautiful Muslim holy place, the Dome of the Rock, to a Christian shrine. They called it Templum Domini. To this day, a grillwork put in place by the Crusaders protects the huge holy rock in the center of the dome from visitors who want to touch the stone. Muslim forces under the Egyptian Sultan Saladin regained control of the city in 1187. When Saladin arrived, the Jewish pilgrims also began returning to the city en masse, being less afraid of the Turks than of the Crusaders. By 1190, there was again a sizable Jewish community behind the city walls. In fact, in 1211 AD, a journey to the old city by about 300 French and English rabbis was graciously allowed by the Muslim rulers. However, during this period, the old walls of the city were torn down. The Muslim rulers wanted the city as open as possible to discourage any future Crusader initiatives. Jerusalem was now open to all comers. But in 1250 AD, Jerusalem fell into the hands of another Muslim group known as the Mamelukes. These former slaves began gaining power in Egypt in the late 13th century. These hardline Muslims took Jerusalem from Saladin's armies and once again began closing the city, establishing it as a holy Muslim site. During this occupation, neither Jews nor Christians were allowed on the Temple Mount. Various military and religious leaders across Europe managed to organize a few later crusades. However, these efforts never had the enthusiasm of those early attempts to protect the holy sites of Jerusalem. And thankfully, by the late 13th century, the Crusades became a bad memory. Today, most Christian leaders agree that the Crusades were a serious error and resulted in the deaths of thousands of innocent people. Their effects continue to influence the world to this day. Those holy quests hardened Muslim attitudes toward Christians and began raising doubts in the minds of lay people everywhere about the total authority of the Christian Church. But a few positive things did happen. The Crusades prompted otherwise isolated people to learn about different cultures and religions. And they began casting doubt on the well-established idea of religious conversion by force. However, one of the last Crusades was led by Frederick II of Germany. He took charge of the Sixth Crusade to Jerusalem in 1228 and was ousted by the Turkish mercenary Quartzamian in 1244. After Frederick's departure, except for a brief period from 1248 through 1254, Jerusalem would not see Christian rule for nearly 700 years.